We here in America are a freedom-loving people, and we have some of the best and most progressive civil rights laws in the world. We may not be perfect. We may not have the best laws. It depends on who you ask, different opinions, but we have done more over time to guarantee civil rights to marginalized groups than many other countries. We're also pretty good on immigration. But in a time of crisis, these things becomes apparent to everybody. It's just luxury politics. Now, civil rights should be granted to everybody. Some civil rights are non-negotiable, assembly, freedom of religion. But in emergencies, you will see that governments, even the US, will suppress these things, and it's a real challenge. Because with rights comes responsibilities. Notably right now, we have a right to peaceably assemble to speak, but we're under lockdown. And people are getting their content removed from Facebook for posting information Facebook doesn't like. These things, to me, are horrifying. Facebook should not remove information. Now, when it comes to quarantine and lockdown, that's the real challenge of responsibility. We have a responsibility not to spread this disease and cause more loss of life. So most of us, to be honest, are kind of selfish about it. It's not so much about getting other people sick. It's about not getting sick ourselves. But we do have a responsibility not to get people sick. Right now, we are seeing a rise of authoritarianism around the world. The story I have for you today, Hungary's far-right leader, Viktor Orban, immediately moves to strip away trans rights after being granted absolute power. Now, as always with media, it's framing. I could totally reframe this to say Hungary's leader is granted power by decree and immediately moves to guarantee civil rights to women. That's another way to frame it. But of course, this is pink news. Pink news is about the LGBT community. So LGBTQ community. So I will point out that framing is always a factor in how the media tells a story, and we'll go through this. But the bigger issue I want to get to today is, for one, as I've said it before, and I'll say it again, we must make sure these powers are limited and temporary. We all understand there's a crisis. When this crisis is over, we must demand that these powers be rescinded. I really doubt they will be, though. We've been in, it's going to be a pre and post COVID world. This crisis is affecting every country on the planet. We are going to see dramatic changes. As one article put it, we're headed back to the 1950s, and I really do think so. Now, Viktor Orban of Hungary was granted rule by decree powers. They're in an emergency, and there's some arguments that he's going too far with it. There's actually some arguments that he's doing a good job with it. And again, it'll be about hindsight, right? I'm sure people will look back on this video and say, I can't believe Tim took a tepid approach to this guy who eventually went on to become a dictator or something. Or they would criticize me if the guy goes on to do something good. I don't know what he will do right now. So please, those of you 100 years in the future looking back at this video, I don't have the gift of foresight. You have the gift of hindsight. All I know right now is that framing plays a role. I personally disagree with his being granted rule by decree. I think that's horrifying, but there are arguments being made in the media that we'll address. Social justice cannot exist when the world is on fire. I'm sorry. To an extent it can. But how many people, are going to be taken seriously when their grandparents are sick and dying and someone's complaining about bigotry and racism? These articles, these SJW types, whatever you want to call them, are kind of fading away, though it still exists for sure. Let's take a look at this story. And I'm going to give you a media framing lesson. And we're also going to talk about the powers he was granted and what it means, social justice, authority, etc. Pink News says that he's taking away trans rights. Hungary's far-right Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, has moved to strip away trans rights as one of his very first acts after his pandemic power grab. Let's zoom in a little bit here if we can. Maybe we can't. There we go. On Monday, the Hungarian parliament agreed to extend Orban's already strong powers by granting him the right to rule by decree indefinitely, meaning he no longer needs to consult other lawmakers before making decisions. I 100% disagree with this. I believe there should always be a time limit for emergency powers, a very short time limit, and they should have to come back, review what he's done, and it should be like a month maybe, and then they review, should we extend this? His powers came into effect on Monday morning, and by the evening, his deputy Zsolt Semjon had introduced a new bill which, if passed, will replace gender with, quote, birth sex in all legal documents issued in the country. The effect of this is that Hungarian citizens will be unable to change their gender legally, a significant rollback of rights in the Eastern European country. Since data in official documents such as ID cards, driving licenses, and passports are taken from the civil registry, the change would affect these as well. The explanatory memorandum of the bill states that current legislation does not define gender, as it is determined biologically, adding, the gender entered into civil registry is based on facts determined by doctors declared by the registry. It further states, given that completely changing one's biological gender is impossible, it is necessary to lay it down in law that it cannot be changed in the civil registry either. In recent years, Orban has refused to join his European neighbors in backing LGBT plus rights, declining to ratify the Istanbul Convention for its definition of gender as a social construct. In 2015, he blocked an agreement to prevent LGBT plus discrimination in Hungary. And in 2017, he hosted and spoke on behalf of a vile anti-LGBT plus group in Budapest. Now, here's the thing we've seen happening. Gender, colloquially, culturally, for many nations, was always taken to be, are you male or female? In recent history, the definition has been changing. This, in my opinion, is a way to bypass the law undemocratically, in violation of democratic institutions. Now, I certainly don't think Victor going in here and just, banging a gavel and making it happen is appropriate either. No, there should be a real debate on whether these things should change. That's how democratic institutions should work, be it a representative body or otherwise. But people have been trying to, look, you have a law, and the law says you cannot discriminate based on gender. So what ends up happening is people say, but gender doesn't mean what you think it means something else. Thus, the law is changed if our understanding of the word becomes something different. Or you can do it the right way. Go in and vote, and if people agree, the law gets changed and the wording gets updated. But as they're pointing out, he says that gender isn't defined the way they want to define it as a social construct. Therefore, they're changing it to either gender at birth or birth gender. It depends on how you translate it. In which case, you could argue that they're going after the rights of trans people. 100%, the framing of this is not wrong. Or you could say that he made a major feminist move to guarantee the rights of females by protecting them from biological males. Look, as much as people on the left don't want to accept it, there are biological females who are concerned about their spaces being taken over. And one of the arguments that I think the most important argument when it comes to sports is that we created women's sports not because of how you feel on the inside, but because of what you are biologically, your immutable characteristic. There was not a point where someone said, we're going to create women's track, running, because some people feel like a woman and they should have this bracket to race in. We said biological females and biological males are very different, so we're going to give biological females their own space. In many sports, females are allowed to compete against males. They just never make the top bracket. Major league sports, for instance. So they said this one's for females. But because our colloquial understanding of the word woman and gender was related to biology, that we didn't feel like we needed it. Well, activists have been slowly eroding those definitions, and now we are seeing biological males compete against biological females, thus undermining the intent and the spirit of these divisions. If you want, you could frame this as the first movie made was an overly feminist move to guarantee civil rights to biological females. And I'm sure many, gender critical, I think they're called, feminists would agree. Framing is everything. Of course, I don't like this guy ruling by decree, so I'm going to be more so opposed to these changes. I get it. They voted for this rule. Look, indefinite power, I am no fan of. And if you think these changes should happen, then you need to earn the right to change it, not just bang a gavel. They say his latest bill will be terrifying for Hungary's trans and non-binary community, and it will not escape their notice that it was proposed on the eve of Trans Day of Visibility, adding insult to injury. Well, it's also the time they passed this decree. Come on. In recent years, Orban has been heavily criticized for his increasing oversight of the judiciary, media, and foreign universities. And the new emergency measures will cement his power by effectively removing all checks and balances. Not okay. The law also introduces jail terms for spreading disinformation about the virus, raising fears it could be used to neuter critics of the government's approach. Yes, excellent use of the word. Well, this guy is certainly gaining a lot of power. There's been a big sell-off, so they're kind of... Look, here's another great thing about capitalism, right? People who make international trades kind of don't want to invest in a country that goes full-on authoritarian, it would seem, and now their markets are hurting, so they got to figure that one out. But there's an argument about whether or not he's doing too much, whether he's doing too little. The first thing I'll say, I don't care. All right, we got this article from The Guardian. It says, Viktor Orban ditches mayor plan amid claims of coronavirus power grab. Some arguments say that a recent decision he made was him seizing power, while others could argue he was ensuring checks and balances. I don't care about the argument, not at all. If your country decides to bang a gavel and give someone absolute power, you will never have my support ever, no matter what the emergency period. I don't like the states forcing lockdowns. I don't like people getting arrested for having parties. I don't like any of it. I understand we're between a rock and a hard place. And there are many progressives and liberty-minded individuals, left libertarians and right libertarians. Well, it's actually the right libertarians who are flicking off the government for the most part. The left libertarian types are rolling their eyes and like facepalming like, what do we do? We recognize the threat to the community. So the lefty in us is like, oh no, man, we can't let people go out and just get people sick. They have responsibility, right? But then the libertarian side is like, should the government have the right to trample the First Amendment? No, thank you. What do you do, man? Well, for the most part, our liberty-loving country has let people do whatever they want. And they've partied and they've shown up and they're on beaches and no one really, very few people actually care. Or I should say, there's few people who just don't care at all. Should the government go and enforce this? I'd prefer it not. I would absolutely. But now we're seeing people snitch on their neighbors. I don't like any of this. How do we get through this without some kind of enforcement? Honestly, I don't know. That's why I'm willing to begrudgingly accept we need temporary restrictions. Orban was given indefinite, power. Yeah, not okay. Absolutely not. How do you remove that from somebody? And he's immediately making moves that are unrelated to the coronavirus pandemic. Why should he change what the definition of a word is? I personally think, for the most part, we should guarantee, civil rights based on immutable characteristics. So women should be protected, biological females should be protected, but not like this, because the ends don't justify the means, period. You were granted power to help the country in a time of crisis, not to make political agenda moves. So no, it's not okay. But the story from The Guardian brings up, they say that Hungary's parliament passed a law that gives Orban the right to rule by decree for an indefinite period and also criminalizes intentionally spreading false information about coronavirus with up to 5 years in prison. The move was roundly criticized by Orban's domestic and international critics. Here we go. It was followed up by a bill of further measures published late on Tuesday evening that would target municipal authorities and mayors, many of whom are from opposition parties. During the state of emergency, mayors can take on the decision-making abilities of local councils, but the new regulation would submit these decisions to a review that could take up to 5 days. The move was immediately criticized as inefficient and unworkable. And later on Wednesday, Gergely Gulyas, the chief of Orban's cabinet, said the government would not follow through on the measure. Budapest's mayor, Gergely, how do you pronounce that? Karacsony, had warned that the measures risked increasing the loss of life due to coronavirus. Interesting. It would seem to me that forcing executive branch politicians into a review period would be a good thing. That's a check, right? Well, they're arguing that it's Victor grabbing power, because then he can rule by decree and they have to rule but be put up for review for a few days. The argument is that they should have decree powers so that they can move much more quickly. I don't like any of it. But this is the main challenge. First, before we even argue about anything, I'll stress again, he should not have these powers in the first place. He should not have the ability to do these things. The decree should have been that for a certain amount of time, he can make decisions as it relates to the national security due to the threat of COVID-19 and, potentially civil unrest. Changing the definition of gender and civil rights law does nothing. It has nothing to do with it. Maybe you could make an argument. I just don't see it. But this rule right here, another questionable thing. Should people be put under review? He should do. So is it good or bad? I honestly don't know. You can look at it either way. But I will leave with one final point that I've made. This is an example of the encroachment. Well, a couple points, actually. This is an example of the threat of authoritarianism we face. There's a reason for it, though. This vanity politics of authoritarian social justice that claims naughty words are violence. It's fake. And it made people run into the arms of more right-wing and more authoritarian leaders. It wasn't just overnight that Viktor Orban came into power. It's been a long time coming. Years. The more these weird cultural institutions were targeted. I'm sorry, let me rephrase it. The more these weird authoritarian lefties targeted our cultural institutions with weird ideology and changing of definitions, the more people got worried and voted for people who would do something about it. Notably Viktor Orban, who is now given the powers to rule by decree. This is not surprising to me at all. I have warned repeatedly that what I expect to occur from Antifa and the far left is far-right authoritarianism, because the American people will beg for security. They will beg for safety. When these people come and start advocating you shouldn't have a family, when these people come and start demanding the government take your children and chemically alter them, to say the least, like we've seen in Texas and other states, you will see people start panicking and begging for a typically right-wing, more authoritarian strongman to come and save the day. Because in the minds of many of these people, we went through the motions of allowing people to vote, And these people who believe the ends justify the means got violent, got angry, manipulated, pressured people. And eventually when regular people in America or anywhere else feel like nothing is working, they will say, just rule by decree and drop the hammer. It's not a country you want to be in, trust me. There may be some short-term gains. You may celebrate, but I'll tell you what, no matter who gets the power, they always turn around and it comes for you, and things tend to get worse. Authoritarianism just doesn't work. Now, there's limits. There's pros and there's cons. There needs to be authority. There needs to be some kind of system, and often the system fails. It's not always perfect. I lean on the side of liberty. I would not be comfortable giving up my freedom in exchange for security. It does not make sense. And if Victor has this power now, all the people in that country who are happy about it, don't be surprised if he turns around on you. They're going to be, he's going to be potentially going after the press if they say things he doesn't like. Not a fan. I don't like fake news in this country. I can't stand it. To be honest, these people are despicable. But guess what? I love the rights. And so as long as I have it, they have it too. And that means I get to complain about them all day. Maybe people will start to recognize it. And we put pressure on these groups to stop doing things through social pressure. It's not perfect, but I'll tell you what. I would rather someone have the right to speak their mind, even if it's something I hate and it's a bad thing about me, than to risk me losing my rights. You take the good with the bad. This kind of decree we will see encroach. We will see more countries adopt these types of measures. We're going to see elections be postponed, and you will regret it. I absolutely believe so. Maybe this guy's not, I don't know. Maybe this guy's not so bad. We'll see. Right? The people in the future watching this are going to look back and say, man, if only he knew. Perhaps. But I'll give that warning now. You don't know what he's capable of. And don't make the assumptions that someone you like will always be a good person, because power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. Of course, you'll find that outlier who, gives up the emperor's throne and goes back to being a farmer, but that's a rare story. Rarely do these people ever give up power because they always think it's better with me in charge. Yes, I could give up power, but then I'll give it to my enemies and they'll be much worse than me. And that's history. That's how things turn out. We'll see how this one plays out. For the time being, be careful of authoritarianism and keep in mind all of these vanity social justice policies of hate speech and bigotry. It's a luxury item. It really, really is. Because when people are losing their lives due to a global pandemic, the luxury item becomes something that no one can afford to buy. The politics then become about, are you doing a better job of saving lives? And when someone comes out and says, yes, but someone said a naughty word to me, they're going to be like, excuse me? My friend is on an ICU bed. Why don't they have a ventilator? I don't care about your stupid naughty word. Save my friend's life. That's what's going to be important. There are always pros and cons to everything. Sometimes the cons are worse. Sometimes the pros are good. No matter what happens, no matter what action you take, you'll end up helping or hurting somebody because the universe is not, your life doesn't exist in a vacuum. And that means we may see some good things in the end of all of this, but I think we're going to see a lot more bad things. So it's always important to point out there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Good things may come, but I think we're going to be bogged down by a lot of really nasty stuff for some time. I'll leave it there. Next segment will be coming up at 4 p.m. youtube.com/Timcast. That is a different channel, and I will see you all then.